So the question is, each of you have sensed that we're around a normal area, 15.5 million, 16.5 million SAR, right, for the next year. So that's your starting point. You may sit down if you think 2015 is below that level.
Below
15, consensus 16 million SAR. Okay, everybody's still standing, 2014, 2015. What about 2016? Do we continue at that level, or do you sit down?
I think everyone should play this game.
2018.
I do have somewhere between 17 and 18 going from like 16.7 down to like...
Well, are you going to sit down or not, Brian?
I can sit down.
Yeah, I think 2018 I'm going to sit down.
And the Federal Reserve remains standing.
That's interesting.
Well, I would just say, you know, when you start going out far enough, so we are now in our 5th year of an economic expansion. Since World War II, historically, expansions have lasted about 5 years. Now, not to say that that has anything to do with the fact that we're going to have a recession in the 6th year, but the longer things go, the more likely that something bad could happen, a negative economic shock could happen. So I think the risks rise as you go further and further out. Keep in mind the longest expansion we've had was the 1990s of 120 months. So, you know, the thought process that we can keep going on and on without having a bad event, I think that probability of something happening does rise.
Okay, you may sit down now.
Thank you.
We have questions. Bring them up to the front if you have them. Let's get right into it. In terms of this technology wave that we're seeing, there seems to be some schizophrenia in the auto industry. It's called the connected car on the hope that the technology will be in the car. If you ask the consumer, they tend to say, I want to be a consumer connected through my car, implying that the technology is in their smartphone in their pocket. Are we heading for a conflict there? Who controls really the connectivity in the end, Brian?
Well, it's a great debate, and I was just out in Las Vegas, as some of you might have been last week at CES. So I think there's very clearly two camps if you look at the OEM. The Ford camp for now says everything's going to go through your smartphone. Your smartphone will be refreshed every year and a half, and therefore that will connect through your car. GM, and I think it's probably one of the lasting imprints of Mr. Ackerson, is getting into the 4G world. So every GM car in 2015 will have embedded 4G connectivity. Many of the basic functions will be free, and then you can upgrade that. I was talking to an Audi dealer yesterday, and Audi's offering $15 a month 3G connections through your car. You know, I think where we saw the leading suppliers going is more in that latter direction. The idea is your car, as long as the data plan can be reasonably affordable. GM's innovation was to beat AT&T into treating it like an additional device on your home data plan. Obviously, good for those AT&T subscribers. Then actually, we think it shifts to wanting to be in the car, but still has to integrate into your smartphone. So the in-vehicle system will know what's on your smartphone. You'll see many of the apps, Pandora, iHeartRadio, TuneIn Radio, Slacker, Glimpse, etc., that are on your smartphone, on your screen. Because there's a lot of things having the embedded technology can do as well. It's all sort of the idea of kind of smart machines. So while we think there is a tension, we think it's kind of shifting towards that embedded connectivity.
Mm-hmm.
Jesse?
Well, I think also the big question is, too, is the regulation on all of this connected car stuff. Like, will we be able to have all those devices in our car, you know, in terms of distracted driving? I mean, I think we know that people like that kind of, you know, stuff to have in your car, but how much is too much is the question. I mean, at the end of the day, technology is going to be a lot faster than car development. So I think, you know, really the flexibility is probably the key as you move forward to have these systems developed.
Ford got into a little whirlwind this week at CES talking about, we know where your car is, we know if you're violating the law, we know where you're driving, and all of a sudden this idea that our vehicles are driving through a cloud of big data and spewing off data, again, another NSA context fear, seems to be an issue lurking behind all this connected, unconnected. Fair?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely fair. I mean, we know that that concern exists out there. I mean, you have people that, you know, won't buy the transponder because they feel like they're being monitored if they drive a turnpike or a highway. So, I mean, of course, I think, you know, there are a lot of privacy concerns. So, I mean, when you look at the idea of a connected car, I mean, there's still a lot of hoops to jump through. I mean, there's, you know, in terms of keeping the customer happy, in terms of giving them what they want, in terms of regulation before we finally get to a good place.
Yeah, I'd argue that we see the consumer make trade-offs every day. So I'm a Waze user, which is now, you know, bought by Google, part of Google Maps now. It basically knows everything that Jim Farley said Ford would know as long as I have my smartphone giving me directions in the car. Now, why are people willing to trade that privacy, if you will? Where am I? GPS, speed? Well, because they'll get real-time traffic updates and so forth. You could certainly see a future where maybe that $15 a month Verizon or AT&T would be charging you for that in-car link is free if you're willing to endure location-based advertising about the fast food chains you're passing. So, you know, the consumer says one thing about privacy, then acts another way when they actually go into the marketplace.
If I could just chime in with some of the earlier question with her. In the audience, how many of you have a vehicle that is more than 3 years old? How many of you have a phone that's more than 3 years old? Yeah, very few hands. And I think it's that concept that as soon as you buy that piece of electronic technology, we know it's out of date. Something better is already, you know, going to hit the market within the next couple of weeks or months, and the fact that vehicles are lasting so much longer to keep them up to date, I think people are really thinking that, you know, having that device, that communication device, to be updated more frequently might be a better way of going. And then with regard to, as Brian mentioned, the Waze, you know, rather than being locked into the OEM's version of technology, you know, to have a very competitive market out there, whether it's Google Maps, whether it's Waze, and of course now Google realized the competition and bought them. I think that's a very rich environment to have the best and brightest technologies allowed to be adopted much more quickly. In fact, when I rented my car yesterday at Metro, they offered me, do I want to have a GPS unit for the car?
Never lost in Detroit.
And I asked them a question that, you know, how many people are actually taking these devices? Because to me it harkens back to back in the hotel days when they used to make a big profit center on long distance telephone calls that people used to make. And of course the cell phone industry killed that off. And to me it's kind of a similar thing that's now being witnessed in the auto industry, the rental industry.
Each of you touched on another big theme, and that these young drivers, young poor, young unemployed, young underemployed. You know, this is an outlook conference. Let's talk a little bit about that. I mean, Bill, you started with the concept of, hey, this is a slow recovery. Well, where are the future car buyers coming from? I mean, we haven't talked about the used vehicle market. Are they going there? They don't have the funds? What's going on with that youth market?
Well, I think we're going to see, I mean, we still have population growth. Population growth in the United States is just under 1%, and that's going to, you know, at a 300 million plus population, that's going to be, you know, creating over 3 million individuals each and every year. So the driving age population will continue to rise.
Are they more discouraged, the youth? Are they part of that 92 million people that have stopped looking for jobs at a higher percentage?
So, I mean, it's hard to say at this point, and I think it's very difficult to make assertions with regard to, you know, whether we're going to see this continue. I mean, clearly part of that underemployment that I talked about, where college kids are holding jobs that are below their training, well, the question is who would otherwise have held those jobs? And as Brian's chart illustrated, we have a lot of the youth that would normally be having some of these jobs, say as a Starbucks barista. You got some college kid doing that now. You know, previously that would have been held held by somebody with lower education attainment levels. So I think there's some reason to be concerned about the near term. I'm not sure we want to start making general statements about the long term, but there was a nice study that was put out by Georgetown University entitled Failure to Launch, which gets into a lot of these demographic issues and the fact that income levels, which normally by the time you're 26 years of age, you've reached that middle level income level, is being deferred now by several years, and that will impact things like the
That's an income level or a wealth issue?
That's an income level.
So it's not the debt issue that
No. It's the income level, but I think that will defer things like buying a home, which of course one way of people accumulating some wealth, and that gives them some equity they use to buy vehicles. It will also mean a delay in terms of the vehicle, or at least the type of vehicle that gets purchased.
Agreed, Jessica?
Well, it's interesting you bring up used vehicles, because you think that's the natural way that these folks are going to be buying cars. And if you actually look at used car registrations, they're pretty much on par with new car registration in terms of the falling, amongst the youth. And I thought, okay, this is easy. This is where they're buying instead, but they're actually not buying there. So I think it further supports the idea that, they are income constraint, and also that whole failure to launch idea that they may have a car and may be registered to mom and dad, or mom and dad may have bought them a car. But as we know, people grow up. I mean, things change. I mean, you have a family, it's not going to be easy to take public transportation any longer. So I think that we will see these people come into the market. It's just delayed. It's just unlike what we've seen in the past. And I think that's kind of, what's unsettling. It's hard to gauge, since we haven't seen a generation like this.